Fifth fam, this is Stefan, and today we'll be talking about how you should properly approach your deload during your training. Or if you're a coach and you want to inform and educate your clients or athletes how they should be approaching their deloads. To start off, I'll be using myself as an example in how I personally approach my deload. So starting off, anytime I reach a point where my body might be reaching the end of its adaptation period, or if I'm beginning to overreach, or if my body is becoming a little bit too exhausted with the period of training that I've been doing, personally, I will take a deload. Now, a deload doesn't have to be, it can be any amount of time that you want. It could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, it could be a couple days. But personally, when I deload, I listen to my body and how my body is responding. So there's no set amount of time that I put for my deload. Really, what I'm doing is I'm allowing my body to readjust and to heal from the bout and block of training that I've put it through. And so it might be a couple days, it might be a week. I really just slowly let my body do its thing on its own. I don't try to step in and kind of push the needle when I don't need it to. But in order to properly approach that deload, what I tend to do is I will lower the load and the frequency of the sets and repetitions that I'm doing for the exercises, as well as I will begin to focus more in tune and become more in tune on my technique and my technical efficiency. So because you've decreased the load and frequency and you're taking that deload, that doesn't mean there's no input or no mental focus in your training. No, if anything, this is a time where you can begin to dial more into the movements and to the skill of what you're doing. So for example, if you are an Olympic weightlifter and you've had a block where you've pushed the load hard for that block and now you're taking like a week or a week and a half deload, this is a time where you can really focus on your form. You can focus on getting that bar path in line. You can focus on the triple extension. You can focus on more so the body mechanics and more so how you should be moving and operating with the lifts in terms of your skill development. If you are a power lifter, this is where you can more in tune and really dive into really how does your body uniquely operate while in the squat under that barbell. So just because you've taken away the load doesn't mean now you get to necessarily relax in the mental aspect of your training. All you're doing is you're allowing your physical body to take that break. But I would ramp up your mental training, really coming up to a game plan. What I would do when I would take my deloads is just like, okay, I'm allowing my body to rest, but now let me begin to formulate a game plan. So when I begin to push the load again, now I'm attacking the sets differently because I've allowed not just my body to relax, but I've allowed my mental game to progress even further. So what this will look like for me is like, okay, now instead of me taking, and I'll use an arbitrary number, and now instead of me taking 400 pounds for those heavy loads and heavy repetitions, I'm going to take 200 pounds, but now I'm going to dive into every single minute detail of the process of the squat. So everything from how am I working up to my top set, how am I approaching the barbell, how am I placing my hands, how am I coming under the barbell, how am I unracking the barbell, how many steps am I taking, what am I doing before I begin to brace, how am I stacking my rib cage, how long is it taking me to get to the bottom of the squat, how long does it take me to drive up from the bottom of that squat. And so what this will do for you is now you'll begin to formulate a process for every single movement. And this is very key for even athletes. Let's say you are a sprinter or a basketball player and you've been going hard in the gym for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and now your body's beat up and you're super tired, but you still need to get in the gym and still practice your skill development. What I would do is I'd be like, all right, cool, maybe I'm not going to do all those like high intensity movements like trying to dunk or trying to do those fancy layups and things like that and really jumping all that in those heavy intensity sprints. Maybe I'll just practice on something like my free throw. Maybe I'll practice on something on just my get off in the sprint. Maybe I'll focus on a different aspect of the game. And so what this is doing, even though the load and the frequency and maybe even the repetitions are shorter, what you're doing is you're diving more deeply into the mental aspect of whatever you're working on. And this will pay super dividends as you begin to get back into the regular cycle of training, and that load and that frequency begins to increase. You're coming from a different understanding. You're coming from a place like, okay, now I have a set process. So for example, let's say, and I'll use a basketball player for example. Let's say you took a deload and all you're really working on is light layups and free throws and maybe just shooting, no real heavy sprinting or high impact movements. When you get back into more so the swing of your training in that practice, or maybe even you get back into more so that game kind of style play, now when you enter into periods of like, okay, let's say you get a foul, now you go to the free throw, now you have an entire process set up. Now you spent time developing an aspect of the game even though you were resting. Let's say you are a power lifter and for a week and a half, all you did was you decreased that weight and you decreased the frequency and you really dived in tune into the system and how your body uniquely operates and functions in the squat. Now when you come back in to squatting those heavier loads, now your approach to it is super different and more in tune. You're more in tune with your body. So now, even if you're squatting 90, 95, close to almost 100% of your max, you have a system and a process in place that you can carry with you from, the 60 to 50% all the way through. And so you begin to almost create a state of flow when you enter back into those heavier and more high impact movements. If you found this of value, if you need more in-depth analysis to help you with your training, click like, click subscribe. I also do online training. I also have programs set up on my website. You can click the link in the description. I will be putting out more content to really help people out with their training, and more so not just the physical aspect of their training, but the mental aspect of their training. A lot of athletes or a lot of people in lifting or in fitness, they more so focus just on the physical aspect of training, but they're never really able to dive into the higher levels of training because they don't tap into the mental and the spiritual aspects of it. This is Stefan. I hope you guys have a beautiful rest of your day. Take it easy.